regarding the Navitus Bay wind farm. Ralph is from the PCBA, which is the Poole and Christchurch Bays Association. So it encompasses a lot of, well, at least 4 constituencies along our coast. And I think it's a great interest and a great synergy with UKIP members and also our current energy policies. So I'd like to hand over now to Ralph. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to talk about the economic and financial costs of wind farms, with particular reference to the turbines that Navitus are proposing to build off the beach of Bournemouth. However, before I start, I would like to thank David Hughes and his colleagues for giving us this opportunity to make this presentation. I am aware that there is an election in 3 months, and therefore time is very precious to you. The PCBA are a group of like-minded individuals who are passionately opposed to the Navitus Bay project. You might or might not be aware that an inspector is due to be appointed in the next few months to examine the merits of the wind farm. And as a result, various experts within the PCBA are working very hard on subjects like wind noise, impact on bird life, dangers to shipping, etc. Whose phone is that? Okay, anyway, the reason that they're working on these subjects is because it is these aspects that the inspector will be looking at when considering the merits or otherwise of this wind turbine project. However, I gather that one aspect that the inspector is not allowed to address is cost. Politicians can reject projects on the basis of cost, but the public are not allowed to oppose a project on cost grounds. So if you do write to your MP, please consider commenting on this deficiency within the system. I hope something that I hope will amuse you a little bit. About 3 years ago, I read an article in the Sunday Times by Dominic Lawson about the inefficiency of wind farms. On the strength of that article, I wrote to my MP, quoting from it and asking the MP for his observations. He wrote back to say that, and these are his words, offshore wind energy is one of the most developed and cost-effective renewable energy technologies. I asked him to justify that comment and then had to chase him for about 15 or 16 months before I got a reply. He eventually came back supporting the case against Navitus Bay. So at least it was a development which I suspect he probably wasn't prepared to consider before. Scottish Power were planning an offshore wind farm off the coast of Scotland, and the wind farm was called the Argyll Array. On Friday 13th December 2013, they decided to abandon it and accordingly made the following statement. It is our view that this project is not financially viable in the short term. The rate of progress in the development of foundation and installation technology has been slower than anticipated. The current outlook for offshore wind development in the UK suggests that this will not significantly improve in the short term. This supports the view that it could take 10 to 15 years for the technology improvements to be available for this project. So we're talking about a project in Scotland which is very similar to the project we talked about in Navitus Bay. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, this problem is supported by the fact that about 3 years ago, the cement grouting, which holds the turbines in place, began to dissolve on more than half of Europe's offshore turbines. As a result, the turbines started to move in their foundations, requiring very expensive repair and redesign. What I don't understand is how is it possible for Navitus to say that they have the answer to a problem which Scottish Power are telling us that they don't have? Just as a general point, the Argyll Array planned to build 300 turbines of 200 metres high, which is not too dissimilar to the ones they were going to build in Navitus Bay, which was about 200 turbines of 200 metres high. So we're talking about something which is comparable. Navitus, the developers of the proposed turbines off Bournemouth Beach, want to build these turbines somewhere between 9 and 12 miles off the coast. Now, there are 2 countries in Europe that have decided that they won't accept that, and they in fact will only allow turbines to build over the horizon, which is deemed to be about 26 kilometres, roughly about 16 miles. Have you any idea which these two countries might be?
France.
No. No.
The two that are building them here.
The Dutch one.
The two that want to build them here.
Germany.
Germany.
Holland.
And who's the one? Yes, and Holland.
Yeah.
So, I mean, clearly they've got some politicians with common sense. Interestingly enough, I did chase my MP up on this point, and his basic response was that the government hadn't made up its mind. I asked him why not, considering that the Dutch and the Germans had already made up their minds, and I now hear that he is co-sponsoring a bill to stop wind turbines from being built closer than 15 miles to the coast. And 15 miles is roughly about 24 kilometres. The National Grid have revealed that they paid £26.6 million to onshore operators in constraint fees in order to prevent overproduction of electricity for a 6-month period in 2013. They also confirmed that operators are earning at the rate of £125,000 a day for not operating their turbines in periods of low demand. It has been estimated that Navitus will be paid a taxpayer subsidy of approximately £7 billion over the 20 years of operation of the wind turbines. This is in addition to the taxpayer subsidies they will receive for building the wind farm. Professor Gordon Hughes of Edinburgh University is a former energy advisor to the World Bank. Using official data, this is information which is available from government sources. Using official data from the UK and Denmark, he showed that due to wear and tear on turbine mechanisms and blades, the amount of electricity that they generate falls very dramatically over the years. A turbine that initially produces an average of 25% of its capacity can degrade over 15 years to produce less than 5%. He advises that with the effects of weather and salt erosion, the average efficiency of a large wind turbine, and we're talking about large wind turbines in Navitus Bay, falls to less than 15% over its useful life, which he also estimates will be nearer 15 years rather than the 25 years that the operators profess. When preparing their forecast for energy production, operators estimate that the turbines will be operated for about a third of the time. Professor Hughes advises that the large turbine efficiency starts off at around 30%, but quickly deteriorates by year 5, and by year 15, this drops to about 13%. So what we're talking about is, his information is based on large turbines. We're talking about large turbines in Navitus Bay. Okay, so it's like for like. He goes on to suggest that we will have to build substantially more turbines or pay tens of billions of pounds more for most of those turbines to be replaced if we are to meet our EU obligations to generate 32% of our energy from renewables. I gather that he's presented this information to the Department of Energy and Climate Change, and they haven't challenged it. The question it seems we all need to ask ourselves, would any of us buy a washing machine or a dishwasher or any appliance which only operated efficiently between a fifth and a third of the time? We'd be off, wouldn't we? Another helpful little comment. Which country has suspended the further building of offshore wind farms because of the cost? Any idea?
Atlantic Array.
USA?
In the Bristol Channel.
No. We're talking about a country that won't build offshore wind farms because of the cost. Yeah, it's the Dutch. Clearly, again, a few politicians with common sense. The taxpayer subsidy that the operators will receive during the period of operation of the wind farm will be £150 per megawatt hour. By comparison, nuclear plants will receive £90 per megawatt hour. However, nuclear plants are roughly 90% efficient compared to wind farms, which are on average about 15% efficient. Because of the differences between the efficiencies between nuclear and wind, the taxpayer subsidy for nuclear actually represents about 10% of that paid for wind. In addition, the nuclear plant will have a substantially longer useful life. Dr. Dieter Helm, an energy expert from Oxford University, argues that offshore wind is one of the most expensive short-term ways of reducing CO2 emissions, which is really what they're trying to do. He suggested the most effective way of decarbonising Britain's energy would be to build gas power plants. He suggests that this will achieve similar CO2 savings as wind, but at a cost of between 5% and 7% of the cost of wind. He accepts that this will not give us energy security in the short term, but would see us through until nuclear power or some other form of energy was available for which we have total control. In addition to which, he suggests that electricity prices will continue to rise because of lack of investment in new power plants and the fact that the gap between supply and demand is closing up. And this last point is very important to remember, that the Energy Secretary in the last Labour government was who, do you think? Ed Miliband. He was obviously too scared to make a decision, and the government as a whole were obviously too scared to make a decision, and this lot that we've currently got in office are no better. The London Array in the Thames estuary is allegedly the world's largest offshore wind farm. It cost $2.2 billion to build and can generate 200 megawatts of power. At the same time, Europe's largest gas power plant in Pembroke was built at a cost of £1 billion and can generate 2,000 megawatts of power. In other words, it will produce 10 times the power for less than half the cost. In addition to which, Pembroke will have a longer working life than the London Array wind farm. So the cost differential is enormous.
Yes.
The Energy Department estimates that electricity prices are at present 17% higher because of green policies. This, they say, will rise to 33% by 2020. And if gas prices do drop, which is not impossible given fracking and other current research into new energy sources, if gas prices do drop, then green policies will be responsible for 44% of our energy bills by 2020. So you're talking about nearly half your bill will be because of the cost of green policies. Wind power is going to be allowed to charge the highest price for electricity and will receive the greatest taxpayer subsidy over the next 7 years. We do know that wind farms are not reliable, and so additional power plants will have to be built as backup in order to provide security of power. In the winter of 2012-2013, it was very cold, and during this time there was very little wind, just at a time when we needed the energy source. The general consensus amongst those who know is that because of the unreliability of wind, higher electricity prices will be paid by both businesses and homeowners, and this will result in higher prices for UK-based products. They also go on to suggest that because of green policies, productive capacity and jobs will probably move abroad. At present, we have no productive capacity to build turbines in this country, so we will be importing the machines rather than building them ourselves. It's also important to remember that at the moment we have a very poor balance of payments record. And the last thing we can afford to do is import more products of a nature which is really of no value to us. About 2 years ago, The Guardian published the CO2 emissions for the countries around the world. Who do you think has the worst record? Yeah, and roughly what do you think they emit? No. About 25, just over 25%. And who do you think is number 2? America, yeah. And theirs is 17.8%. And what about the UK? How much do you think we emit?
2%.
Less than 2%, 1.7. The Guardian did also go on to say that the Chinese CO2 emissions were growing at the rate of 13% per year. So if the UK became green overnight, the Chinese would replace our CO2 emissions within 8 months.
70 or 80% of what we buy in the shops.
Yeah.
In this room, everything's
Yeah.
in this room are made in China.
Yeah.
Nearly everything we buy.
Yeah. And a volcano erupting, which it did yesterday, wipes the whole lot out.
It's even more reason not to happen, isn't it? Now, something Navitus had not told us about is what it would cost and how they would pay for the wind farm to be dismantled, and what they would do with the concrete bases which they have built for the turbines, because these concrete bases, was it you, Russ, who was making the point that they're absolutely enormous, and none of us can perceive how big they would be. And you're talking about something which is over 600 feet tall, being held in the seabed, so it's got to be enormous. Anyway, my gut instinct is that Navitus will let the financial resource, the wind farm, run down to the point where the company is left with no reserves, leaving the taxpayer to pay for the dismantling of the wind farm. Someone made a point to me that that Navitus is 50% owned by EDF Energy, which in turn is owned by the French government, and therefore the costs will probably be met by the French government. I recently read that the French government was suing EDF for compensation for some scheme or other. So you have to ask yourself, if that's going on what guarantee is there that the French government will actually pay for dismantling costs? In addition to which, not so long ago, all of us will remember the BSE crisis in the 1990s, when the French government banned English meat products and refused to pay any fines.
And burning the land.
Sorry?
And burning the land.
Yep.
Didn't pay for that.
It's fair to say the developers are only interested in these projects because of the large taxpayer subsidy they will get. With these subsidies, they will be making a return in excess of 10% compared to the less than 1% we get. The Valuation Office Agency is a government agency which decides if houses should be moved into a lower council tax band because the impact of the wind farm near their homes is considered a statutory nuisance. Now, they have moved houses into a lower council tax band since the development of onshore wind farms. An obvious consequence of this is that we will end up having to pay more in way of council taxes to compensate for the loss of income to the councils, because houses will have been moved. In addition to which, you could find your estate agent tells you that your property is now worth less because of the location of the wind farm. Navitus Bay have done some research into the impact that the wind farm is likely to have on tourism, which is the main source of income for this town. Their figures suggest that something like 14% of respondents said that they would never come back, and approximately 33% of visitors to Bournemouth said they would stay away during the construction process, which is estimated to be about 5 years. Now, how many businesses could withstand that level of drop in their income, and what is it going to do for jobs in the town? The last Labour government of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair sold our nuclear heritage in the form of Westinghouse to the US for a trivial £3 billion. This government says it wants energy security, then sells our first nuclear plant in generations to the Chinese and the French. And we're also now dependent on our friend Vladimir Putin for some of our supplies of fossil fuels. Very reliable and very energy security. No. One last point, the Jurassic Coast has been granted World Heritage status by UNESCO, which clearly is considered to be a very important aspect. Someone sent me, my friend Brendan actually sent me an article about Tasmania and its World Heritage status. When this was challenged, the politicians reduced the size of the World Heritage site in order to allow development to go ahead within what was once the World Heritage site. So please do not assume that something similar will not happen in this country. And our politicians are politicians, and we know where they want to go, when they want to go there. I would urge you all to remember to write your letters of objection to Navitus, your MP and your local councillor. There are some crib sheets on the table there which you can use. It's got Navitus Bay's address on it, as well as points that you can use as a basis for your objections. Okay, well that's me finished. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us down to give our opinions on things. I'm Commodore at Christchurch Sailing Club, and I was co-opted onto the PCBA to give advice on navigation and sailing dangers caused by Navitus, as there are quite a lot. So MTBL have created, as you might see from this little plan that's around you, what you might call the Navitus Crossroads. I call it the Navitus Crossroads. What a ridiculous place to put a wind farm. The Marine and Coast Guard Agency, that's the MCA as it's known, do have guidelines that shipping routes should not run adjacent to wind farms. And they recommend that there should be a 2.5 nautical miles separation zone between them. And instead, we have the Poole Cherbourg route running right alongside the western coast of the proposed site, and the guided path into the Needles Channel and out of the Needles Channel is on the northwestern coast. And so they're pushing traffic into very much corners, and of course there's recreational traffic and fishing traffic and coastal tankers moving around there all the time. And so the positioning of it is very, very wrong. Of course, this is a very big, number 2 on your list, this is a big area for commercial and recreational boats. The Royal Yachting Association emphasised the importance of the area to the developer in 2010, but they ignored that, as they ignored the Marine Coast Guard Agency advice. the Energy and Climate Change did a report acknowledging that the 12-mile area around the British Isles is particularly busy for recreational craft, and an important one too, because recreational tourism, as they call it, represents £3.7 billion to our economy, and probably on the south coast we take at least a third of that. And so the south, there again, we don't want to, it's not destroying it, but it's not encouraging it, because it's an industry that is rising and not declining. Another reason, as it is a busy area for, probably one of the most busy areas for recreational sailing in the country, because you've got boats coming from all over the Solent area and from Christchurch and Poole, and it is the cross-channel route really for most cruising boats and racing boats around the country. So they all congregate in there. And this is number 3 now, degradation to the radio. Well, as you might know, VHF radio is the use for safety boats, safeties on boats. Now, if you go between turbines, which are as tall as nearly every skyscraper in London, except for the, what's it called, the tall one? The Shah. You can imagine that the radios aren't going to work very well, and anybody that does have a problem won't be heard, and so it's very concerning for safety. Of course, you have to appreciate the size of these wind turbines too. Apart from being nearly as tall as the Shah, the area that's covered by the diameter of the blades is 5 acres. Now, I don't know if you know what 5 acres looks like. Maybe you're not agricultural people, but if I said it's 4.5 times the size of a football pitch, that gives you the idea of the sweep of one turbine, and they're very big things out there. Of course, number 4, we're talking about the degradation to radar. Now, this is more serious, really, than the radio, because once a ship becomes within 1.5 nautical miles of the wind farm, radar becomes very distorted because of it causes big distortions in the side lobes, and any big shadows on the screen mask any small targets that might be in the way. And so it's very worrying, really. And of course, nobody will be able to find any yacht or recreational boat or fishing boat within the wind farm, because the signal will be just too distorted. So it's a serious consequence. Now, these, with the radio and the radar, the Marine and Coast Guard Agency and the RNLI did trials on the North Hoyle wind farm, which is north of North Wales, not that far off the coast, you can see it. And they have 30 wind turbines there, and a lot smaller. And the trials there said that they were serious concerns of finding casualty vessels in the wind farm or near the wind farm. So, you know, it is the wrong place. It's the wrong place again. Number 5 on your list, which you might have read, the tidal flows of up to 3.5 knots in the Navitus area have a significant influence on sailing boats. The sideways push effect makes it very dangerous, being faced with isolated dangers. Now, you'd think that if you sail from the Needles to France or the Channel Islands or the Poole, anywhere, you would go on the line of the ferry. Now, that isn't the case with a sailing boat, because the sideways push is so great that you may be steering straight, but in fact, I've done it a lot of times, you'll be at least 10 miles off to the west or to the east in the duration of crossing to France. And so you can imagine that you're going actually steering straight, but you're actually going sideways. And if you had poor visibility or any mechanical problems, and you came up against one of these turbines, I can assure you a dangerous situation would be on your hands. Because if you saw it there and you tried to steer up against the tide, you'd slow down of the draft better or worse, I don't know. You may be on a collision course that way, or if you go too fast. I can tell you, avoiding things in poor weather conditions is not easy in tidal conditions. And it's not undertaken by the people who, the Crown Estates who originally thought of putting it in the right place. I'm not sure it will be taken on board by the inspectorate. And of course, DEC, who will make the final decision, will be guided by somebody that doesn't have any consideration at all. But we've got to get this point across, really. It is a dangerous situation. Number 6 on your list, marine accidents continue to happen and always cause environmental damage. Well, I suppose I've harped on it already, really, but any vessel, whether it's commercial, recreational, fishing or whatever, if it suffers any mechanical failure, rigging, power loss, foul propeller or anything in that area will possibly crash into these pylons. They won't be friendly things to hit into, not like you're not going to be there having a problem on a nice day. Anybody can do it on a nice day. It's when the conditions go wrong. And you might remember a few years ago the ship Napoli had engine failure and got into trouble in the southwest approaches. It eventually broke up. It caused lots of seabird deaths, lots of environmental damage on the beaches. It took 2 years to clear it up, and it cost £120 million to clear it up. And since then, another boat sank up the coast to the east and deposited all the timbers on the beaches up through Worthing, and as you might remember, with all the pictures on the television. That was lucky, that was timber, not oil. So any boats that are approaching there and get into trouble, of course, there was a brand new ship with all the modern navigation equipment on. Went too close to Alderney, which is just down here, and clipped the rocks fairly recently and got into trouble. It was recovered, but even last week, a Spanish cargo ship floundered with engine trouble on the Spanish coast. I think it was just on the French-Spanish border, and it broke in half. Luckily, it wasn't loaded with any undesirable sort of environmental problems. So the environmental damage isn't too bad. But what I'm saying really is that accidents will continue to happen, and they always have happened. So, and of course, if we do have a big spillage there, where will it end up? On Bournemouth Beach, Christchurch Beach, Swanage Beach, or down the Solent. So this Navitus crossroads is really in the wrong place. And I endorse you all to, if you can write letters and say anything, please do.
In a nutshell, how was the decision made to have it there? And second question, how many windmills approximately are we talking?
I didn't keep my hearing aids in today, go louder.
In a nutshell, how was the decision made to have it there? And second question, how many windmills approximately will there be for the project?
Well, the Environment Agency, Crown Estates initially allocated the area, so because they draw ground rent on it, which is fair enough. It goes into the treasury and keeps the Queen happy. But and of course there is the latest proposal. It's been reduced slightly. It's 194 turbines now, which is a lot of turbines compared with the. We were talking about trials being done on the North Oil Farm, which was only 30 turbines. So.
Lawrence, there's just. We're rapidly running out of time. If anyone's got any questions,
I just would like to say one thing, really. It says at the bottom here, the last one, the effects of change to the wind and climate downwind are unknown. Now, that's an odd thing to say, really. It isn't really my subject, really, but I don't know if anybody's ever seen this picture, really, but when big turbines mix the warm air and the cold air together, they can form a fog under certain conditions, which would be springtime. And so, you know, we don't want fog coming down on Bournemouth beaches, do we? That's a lot smaller wind farm. We don't know what will happen downwind of a large wind farm.
I think we don't, the phrase "we don't know what will happen" permeates this whole scenario, doesn't it? That's a fascinating photograph.
Yes, is that photo available anyway on the website?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Will they be seen, well, heaven forbid they're not built, but will they be seen from the French side, and if so, are they okay with it?
We don't know. I mean, if they were built over the horizon, you're talking about roughly 16 miles. It depends on how far the coast is from the other side. I suspect probably not.
No, they wouldn't be. No, if we sail the channel, we have about 4 hours of visibility seeing the English coast, if it's clear, and about 4 hours without any coast showing, and then we have about another 4 hours seeing the French coast.
Just take a last question from the
Can
gentleman
I
there.
just ask Lawrence, if a sailing boat is going towards the wind farm and they're pushed into the area of the wind turbine and the propellers, and there is a swell which is lifting and lowering the boat, and the mast is what, 40 foot mast?
No,
Is there any chance?
these are really large machines, and there's a clearance at height of the highest tide of 22 metres, which is quite considerable.
Okay, thank you.
Residential, recreational and fishing vessels can go into the wind farm, but commercial ships cannot enter. So it does make very dangerous pinch points where they're going around the corners.
Okay.
So of all the places in Britain where they could have them, why such an inappropriate spot?
I don't know why they put I think we'll actually have to draw it to a close now, because it's actually getting close to half. Oh, sorry. Guy, go on.
Yeah, no, just quick. I had Steve the ring, so forgive me for making this point. Remember that it's part of another strong argument against, which is the technology. I mean, technologically wise, these things are completely out of date. The fact of the matter is that MIT and Stanford are working on photocells now that are more efficient than biological plant cells. Okay, they've got. We can generate power. Now, I think last week I read something. I think it was in the Telegraph about cold fusion, and I think they cracked it to a certain extent. I mean, these things are seriously out of date. We've got new technologies emerging in the next 5 to 10 years, which make them obsolete. So it's another part of the argument.
Absolutely, no, absolutely.